So, okay, let's talk about the things we're here to talk about.
Is this us recording?
Huh?
Is that the beginning?
I don't know. I guess it's going to be because I have a feeling you'll make it. So
it is now. We've got a lot to get through today. So we're just going to, I normally finish my coffee before we actually start recording, but it's still on the go. So I will drink it quietly.
I have just a touch left.
Right. Permitters and restrictors. This was something that, well, do we want to tell the listeners what happened last week?
Sure.
Or not? Okay.
Yeah, you do it.
Okay. So last week, Steph and I were recording, and just before we started recording an earlier episode, Steph had a notification pop up, which I think you did mention in that episode, that it was some blood results from the doctors, and you weren't going to look at them. And then before we recorded our third episode that we were going to record, you did look at them, and you saw some numbers, and it activated you, correct?
Sure did. This was exactly a week ago. It's so funny because my perspective has changed.
Yeah.
In a week.
It was strange for me to see that because your whole face changed.
Yeah,
like everything. Your eyes look different, your face looked different. And I said to Steph, do you want to record an episode? But you were kind of like, no, I was think like,
okay, I can do it.
Yeah. And so we started recording the episode, and well, you started.
I don't even know what you're gonna say.
To be honest. You not?
No.
So you said something about, someone said to you the other day that you're a restrictor and I'm a permitter, as in you, Steph, and me, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
And that bothered you because it feels like, the way I understood it is, it feels like that dismisses a huge chunk of your experience and the nuance of your experience as well. And I think because you were activated, like, you seemed really mad about it. You kind of seemed mad at me. I know you weren't.
Really? Yeah. See, this is the part I wouldn't have included if I told the story. I don't remember, because this is what happens to me when I flood. Yeah, it hijacks everything. And so I'm interpreting everything through the lens of aggression, fear, activation, which must have been what was going on. And we actually stopped recording, right? I mean, I know that much.
We did.
It's not all a blur. We stopped because I was just not myself. Apparently, I was too angry.
I can't even remember but you said something to me, but like, I don't know. You then asked me a question, but it sounded very aggressive the way you asked. I can't even remember what you said, but I was like, "Whoa, okay." Like I feel like,
I remember you being like, "Get out of here, stop." I didn't realize that that's why I was absolutely flooding about something. And to be just as a side, like this week, what I was flooding about and what struck me as so dangerous, I don't feel that way now. It's like I can understand the lens I was looking through is very myopic in that moment, and seeing something and making a whole story. And now the story has changed and I see it for what it is. And I'm not in that space anymore, and it's not dangerous. And it's kind of like, okay, I can see it with clarity. And a week later, I'm feeling better about it and more able to record an episode. So we'll do that now.
I think the restrictor and permitter concept is something that seems to really resonate with people. Yeah. And we have spoken about it before, but we should probably summarize what we mean.
And it's Geneen Roth's terms, right? I don't know. Yeah, she's kind of the OG of that.
Yes, she coined it. So the concept is, and of course it's going to sound like a binary concept, and that's probably a bit of what we'll get into today. Yeah. But I think what you didn't appreciate was being pigeonholed into one side of it. And it's interesting as well, I think, for us to think about what we make it mean, depending on which one we're more identified with. How do we judge those different ones depending on our own experience? So the idea being that restrictors are the people who, they want the rules. They love the rules. They want someone to tell them what to eat, how to eat, so that they've got something clear that they can follow. And that's how they feel safe. And they don't trust themselves. And then, of course, as is usually the case with most restrictors, there are moments where they lose control, which only serves to confirm, I can't trust myself, I do need the rules, and then they put their rules back in again. That's kind of how the restrictors, so they're much more restrictive, right, around their food.
Physically restrictive.
Yes.
I think that's the big difference, that the restriction comes through in behavior.
Yes. And then the permitters tend to be a bit more permissive with their actual behavior around food. So they are more likely to eat more and not do so much physical restriction of food. There's usually a lot of guilt in there as well. So it's not like they are truly giving themselves unconditional permission, but it's more like rebellious. That's how I think of it. Like the permitters is much more rebellious.
Oh, really?
Yes.
that's fine. I'm going to just add something because I see permitters as also defeated. So like it can be rebellious, but it can also be like, why bother? I can't anyway. Like I link permission, not permission, but permitterism with a bit of a low.
Yeah. Yeah.
But mental restriction can be very loud in permitters. It's just not behavioral necessarily.
Yes. Yeah. And there are many people that will just swing between these two places, or they might be 70% of the time they're restrictors and 30% of the time permitters. This is a very fluid up and down scale. And the point that I always like to make, how I think of it as well, is that when I think of it in terms of what the fear is that drives it, again, I've said this before, but I'll reiterate it for this episode, is that the restrictors, what seems to be the big existential fear that they want to get away from is the fear of being out of control. It feels really unsafe to be out of control. Whereas for the permitters, the fear that's even bigger than that is the fear of being controlled. So for permitters, as someone who identifies as mostly permitter, something that I say to myself that comes from me can be felt like some kind of external control that's trying to control me.
I see that. But I also feel like I have been equally afraid of being controlled on both sides. I think that actually when I was restricting, yes, I feared being out of control, but I equally feared it when I was permitting. And I equally feared being controlled when I was a restrictor.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking, like, in terms of which one wins, if it feels like an either or in the moment, like it feels like the restriction part, let's say take someone who's following a diet, like they're following external rules and they're using that to restrict. Not that they particularly like a feeling of being controlled, but it feels safer than them being out of control.
But it also feels like how you are controlling it. I think being a restrictor can also feel like, I know that the rules come from outside, but it can feel, and I've met different kinds of restrictors, of course. Like there's the kind that are more like that type A, like tell me, like I'm gonna follow the rules that the external guidance has given me, and they're very identified with that. But I was the kind of restrictor that felt, I scanned the outside for ideas and I was like, I'm putting in my rules and these are mine. Like I identified them with as mine, and they were a way that I stayed in control.
Which emphasizes what I'm saying. Like it emphasizes that the important thing was it was your sense of control.
Mine. Yeah.
I'm in control. Yeah. Because the fear is I'm proposing the pattern I think I'm seeing, and I'm obviously always open to, like, let's play devil's advocate with it. But the pattern that I'm seeing is that people who restrict, that desire for them to feel in control is the most important thing.
Yeah. Because we don't want to be controlled.
Yeah. But whereas for the permitters who feel like they live in the chaos with food, yes, they would love to be in control. Those times when I was in real permitter mode, I really wanted to be in control, but I didn't want to be in control more than that idea, because it felt very threatening. Like I just had to keep pushing back against these rules.
Oh, control in general. So it's not about whose it is. You just, okay.
No, but it is a bit, but it's mainly something that feels external. It's a feeling of being controlled. So there's a difference of like, I feel like I'm being controlled, or I feel like I'm in control.
I think what I resist is talking about it in the black and white, because I identify with both sides so much that it almost felt like an affront to be considered one side. Cause I'm like, oh no, that's minimizing the experience that I've had, that I struggled with so hard. And I think that I think that there's people who identify very much with one or the other, but I also think there's a group of people who identify very much with both. And I guess I feel like I'm that representative, right? Like that feels like me. I feel very much like I can turn on one side or I could turn on the other side and feel like I can talk about each side for so many hours. And I have, and I do.
Yeah. But when we're talking about it, which behavior wins, you've spoken about it in terms of like before you went into your all-in recovery, that you feel like for you were weight suppressed. So does that mean your restrictive behaviors were winning, which is what would make me feel like you were pulled more that way at that time in your life?
No, I mean, I was weight suppressed, but okay. So I was under my weight, but I wasn't a small body. I restricted super hard and I binged super hard. When I look back on those 10 years, my behavior was such that I had periods of such intense control, but it was like I had an equal and opposite binge, which is also what Geneen Roth said. It's like my binges were also humongous and full. It had as much charge as the restriction did. They had as much energy as the restriction did. That was more my orthorexic phase. Prior to that, it was probably somewhere in the middle. And then before that, when I was in college, when I talk about being in London in my early 20s, it was just binging. So I feel like I've just sort of like walked around all of it.
Yeah. And I agree. I guess when you talk about in your restrictive orthorexic time that you restricted hard and you binged hard, your binges felt like a very physiological backlash to your restriction, not necessarily coming from the permitter mindset.
Correct. My permitter mindset was earlier. I had what was more anorexic behavior in the very, very beginning, which turned into binge restrict, probably this both thing. And then it turned into permitter for a good 7 years. And then restrictor came in again.
I was so confused when I went to my first OA meeting, Overeaters Anonymous. I was so confused because I was looking around and I was the biggest body in the room. And I was thinking, this is supposed to be a meeting of overeaters. And everyone was talking about restriction. It really did baffle me. And I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of all the permitters out there like I'm some kind of spokesperson, but I know that at a time I really envied the fact that they could control some of the time. I could see that they were suffering. So it was no part of me that was going like, oh, you're fine. I could see their pain was raw and real, but it was confusing as a permitter to go, well, but you can control like more of the time than you don't. So surely that's better. And I guess I wanted to name that because that was really strong in me at that time. And I would have like at that time gone, I'd love to be. This is how I would have thought at the time. I really want to state this is very eating disordered thinking. I would have given anything to have been orthorexic.
Yeah.
At that time.
People say that, and I can understand that. I think that makes sense. I don't, because it's also saying like, well, at least you can control sometimes. And of course that's more socially validated. So of course it feels like that. It's interesting though, because I also went to OA. It's a different year. I think you probably went later than me. I was going in like 1999. And it wasn't that way. It was all permitters and all bigger bodies. I just was the youngest. I remember feeling like, why I felt so silly. I was so embarrassed because I was like, I'm 19 or 20 and everyone else is like 40, 50, 60. And I felt like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't there any other people my age? So maybe it's just different chapters of it too.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, it also came up because I think I've just been reflecting on how this shows up for me, this fear or perception of being controlled and how strong a reaction I have. I don't think many people like being controlled. I kind of want to name that. It's not like people are going like, oh yeah, I'm happy to be controlled. But there's different when it's almost like a triggered, very reactive response when I perceive it coming. And so I've moved recently. I've joined my local gym. And at this gym, you have to sign into the machines with your account to use the gym, which means every one of your workouts is logged. Which means the other day when I did a minute longer on a machine than I normally, just a minute longer of cool down, I get big fireworks on my screen telling me that I've done like a personal best. Now, I do not and did not find that kind of stuff triggering. Exercise was not too much of a problem for me, like in my disordered relationship with food and body. But what I really resent, and like it gets me really worked up even thinking about it now, is that I don't have a choice. In order for me to use this gym, I have to have every workout logged. And I feel really mad about that. Had it been a choice, I might have just gone, oh yeah, let's log. I mean, my workout's really boring. I do the same thing every time. I'm not interested. And anyway, I've been dodging having the induction. They want you to have an induction. I'm like, I don't need a gym induction. They're the same machines as I've used before. So I've been just dodging this. And anyway, I went to go the other day and it wouldn't let me log on because it finally cut me off. Kept getting passive aggressive emails. Well, I kept getting passive aggressive emails from the gym saying I needed to get this induction done. And I was just dodging it. But then it cut me off. So I had to go up to the staff member there. And so I had to fill out some forms and whatever. And then I had to download this app on my phone. and it had my name, my date of birth, and then it said weight, and it had like optional kind of grayed out, and then it said height optional. But I tried to pass and it wouldn't let me pass. I had to put something in. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
And I look at the guy and I'm like, I don't want to put my weight in. And he's going, do you not know your weight? He goes, you can just guess. You can just put a rough.
Yeah,
like,
I always put 1.
And I said to him,
every time.
It didn't start at 1. Like you couldn't. It was in kilograms. So anyway, I said to him, on my high horse, I said, look, I'm an eating disorder therapist. I said, and I've recovered from an eating disorder, and I don't want to put my weight in things. I don't even want my workouts logged. Like I really resent this. And the poor guy, I mean, there's nothing he can do. So I put my weight as 102 kilograms and my height is 60 centimeters.
I don't know what you're talking about. So to me, I'm like, not like,
okay, 102 kilograms would be about, someone's going to like 230 pounds. Okay. But then my height was like half a meter, like a foot. And then he says to me, so what are your fitness goals? And I look at him and I say, I just want to get my heart rate up. And he looks at me and goes, well, what other goals have you got? And I'm like, I just want to get my heart rate up. And he's looking at me. And then I'm annoyed with myself because then I caved and I started talking about my yoga. And then he relaxed. And I was like, oh no, I should have just like allowed the discomfort. I was disappointed with myself. And also shops, when shops start demanding my email address. I bought a dress the other day in a shop. Also, I did that in phase 8. And they're like, the email won't go through. So they knew it was a fake one.
I have actually a spam account. I have a whole email address.
But out of principle, I don't even want to do that because it's not just about that. It's about being forced to. And they said, I need a valid email address. I said, are you telling me that we've gone way off topic here? I'll just finish this and we'll get back to.
I have thoughts about something.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So are you telling me that if I don't give you my email address, you are not going to sell me this dress? And she's like, yeah, no, I know I can put it.
They have a workaround.
And I was like, you can't. And I was fuming.
Okay, so you're telling me these stories and I can feel myself activating because of the reasons I think you would be activated, right? And this is the crux of why it's so it's hard for me to talk about it, because let me go into my permitter side. There is a side of me that at one time in my life would have experienced something like that, gone home and binged just because of this, just because of like a stick it to the man. Like somehow my binging sticks it to the man. You know, it's always a lot. It was like, who am I hurting here? But nonetheless, this is how it goes. And I know I'm not alone. So there is a reason. I think it's the response to being controlled where we're like, it's the rebel, right? And I identify with that 100%. I've done that a million times. And the very same feeling in me, I could switch over and be like, I'm going to go restrict like that. I think it's the same feeling. It's just that I can go either way with it. It doesn't make sense. It's just in the same way it doesn't make sense to respond to being controlled with sticking it to the man that really sticks it to myself. That doesn't make sense. It equally doesn't make sense to go, now I'm going to further control things when it's a response to control in the first place and being controlled. But for me, either response would go to this feeling. I could do both. I could do either one, just depending on the context of my life. But restricting is still the response to, I don't want to be controlled.
What kind of student were you?
A really good one. But I was a type A, straight A, all that stuff until I graduated high school. Then went to college, became the permitter, never went to class, never. I still got good grades, but I never went to class. I just fell off. And so I have both in me. And now I'm a good student. Like when I go, I'm still a good student, but I don't do it the same way. I don't do the things they tell me to do and want me to do. I don't do assignments for the sake of doing them and handing them in and getting a good grade. If it doesn't make sense to me, I don't do them. But if it makes sense to me and I'm going to get something from it, I will. I feel like all of that has evolved. I guess my point is just, I feel like misunderstood in some way, where I feel like you can be a restrictor and still be responding to being controlled. Like that is what that is.
I agree, but if it comes to an either or, which wins? If you're in a bind and you like you said, you can go one way or another way. So for you, it's like sometimes one wins and sometimes another. It's
not a winning thing. It's a context. So it just depends on where I am in my life or in that day. Like I plus I'm not doing that anymore. So, but if you ask the inclination to go, I could do both any day. It's just luck, I think, or my mood.
But it sounds like when you say it's context dependent, that's when you're very much in TA terms, it would be like you're in your adult, you're in your here and now, you can look at the situation and you can make a decision that makes sense. So I guess we're talking in a moment when I am activated. And so we respond in a reactive place.
I get it. And I can do either. I don't feel like I have one that wins. I feel like either or. I could go either way. I could do both. They both make sense to me and they're both inclinations. It just, one happens to win and one doesn't. It's not one always. It's not. It wouldn't be.
I was just going to say, for me, I feel like I had to do quite a bit of work on learning how to say no to food. And I hear a lot of the work that happens, particularly in the whole binge restrict thing and the all in and the permission around food, is learning about how to say yes to food. And so I did need to do that a bit. But once I realized how that made sense, that was the easy part. Because I did realize how mental restriction was contributing to my binges. Like that was around, that was a piece of the puzzle that couldn't be ignored. But when I realized that, the saying yes to food from a freer place was easy once it made sense. There was very little that needed to go on a less cognitive level around that. But when it came to this idea of like, how do I say no in a non-restrictive way, just because like in that moment, that is a wise thing to do for me. And that was much trickier. That took a lot more time to get to that place. And I think that for people with permitted tendencies, and like, I'm curious your experience of this as well, having permitted tendencies as well, just how you think of that really.
Well, you're talking about how to say no from a wise mind. I think that's equally hard for a restrictor. I had to learn that too. Even though I knew how to say no to food, it came from not a wise mind. It came from the activated space. So I had to do just as much work to say no from an aligned place. The only way I knew how to say no to food was from a controlled place. It was coming from the wrong place. You know what I mean? So to me, I've had to do work equally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
To me, it's all the same place it's coming from. It's just like which direction it goes. I don't know. I had to work on a completely different, I had to work on wise mind. I had to work on regulation. That was completely new territory for me.
I mean, we've got people listening to this, haven't we?
Like what are they supposed to do with it?
Like, or how they might think about it and understand themselves in this, I guess, because I feel like for the last 20 minutes, however long, you and I have been like fumbling around trying to figure out, okay, like, well, where's the line? Where's you? Oh yeah, when you say it like that, I guess that is the same as that. And I'm still clearing my mind in thinking of this. So I'm just trying to imagine what the listener might be thinking and trying to keep up and how to make this useful.
I think it might be helpful to think about, well, anytime you're hearing other people try to work something through, I think you can be like, oh, right, that might be a different way to think about it. Let's just take it a different direction in terms of, see, I think what we were trying to do is try to say like, okay, if you're a permitter, it like, where does that come from? What drives it? And when you're a restrictor, what drives it? I think what we've gotten to me, like what my issue with it is, I don't think it's that clear. I don't think it's like, oh, well, you can take from it that if you're a permitter or a restrictor, this is your core issue. I don't think so. The same core issue could produce one or the other. I think of it like this. Whether you're a permitter or a restrictor, I think what I would take from that is that there's still a core activation that this response has learned to pair with. So looking at that as activation itself, like what does activation do to us? What is happening in activation? What is it that's activating us? And how do you get to wise mind from activation? That's maybe more the point, because activation equals permitting or restricting. How do we not permit or restrict? How do we not go in a binge place or a restriction place? Like what is the actual goal?
Well, I guess that comes back to the regulation part. And as we become more self-aware and we spend more time looking at this and trying to understand ourselves, for me, I think I started to realize sooner and sooner when I was being activated. Because before, I don't know how many times, like years ago, I would be activated or triggered by something and I would have no idea that I was activated or triggered till I spat out the other side. I look back and go, what was that all about? Right?
Yeah. Yes.
So anytime I'm getting not anytime. That sounds like I do it perfectly every time. That's not true. I could be spiraling into a thought or a belief and go, but this might not be true. And the other one as well is if I notice I'm like, wow, I've got a lot of feelings at the moment. It's a case of I don't need to make any decision about what this means while I'm feeling like this. I don't have to make any decisions about what to do while I'm feeling like this. So I think a couple of things like that. But I think on the whole, being much more comfortable and even finding relief in going, I don't know if this is really true, whatever it is that I'm believing. Even times where I've had a body image day where I've just felt a bit off in my body and my body has looked very different to me. In order to try and convince myself what my body does look like today, I can just hold that doubt of going, I've got these feelings. My body looks different to me today than it did yesterday. And so I don't know what's true. Oh, okay, great. I don't have to figure it out. I still feel a bit uncomfortable in my body, but there's nothing to figure out. There's no work to be done. And I think that has just come through, I guess, increasing self-awareness, all the Byron Katie stuff of questioning thoughts about all kinds of things like that. I think I just question my thoughts even when I'm triggered much more often or much quicker than I used to. And that brings me down. I mean, regulates me, not brings me down.
So in what you're talking about, these examples are more like there are subjective truths. What about in the case of the guy at the gym?
I'm enjoying my outrage. I'm having a good time with it. I don't want to come down.
Okay, so you're not resisting it.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm going to write something to them. I think that's a bit different because I tell you what, there's a really enjoyable streak of self-righteousness in the other where I feel like I'm speaking up on behalf of people who can't speak up.
Yeah. Okay. So you take it to advocacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Which most situations, that's not necessarily part of the story, right? With the other things that might provoke me. But I also go into like, how do I make a choice about this? So this shop where I had the thing with the email, exactly the same thing happened to me at the same shop a couple of weeks later. And they tried to say that they couldn't sell it to me. I said, I had this conversation 2 weeks ago with you. Anyway, this morning, actually, there's this shop that I like, Phase 8, it's in Ringwood, which is like a half an hour drive from where I am. I'm like, I want to go and have a look in Phase 8. I know they've got some new stuff in and I will go and have a look. And as I'm driving, I'm thinking, I might have this conversation again. But then I'm thinking, I've really started to like this store and their stuff. So maybe I should just offer them my email, because if I start to get deals or discounts, I actually want that.
Yeah.
So what I did, I decided ahead of time. It's like with food, when you decide ahead of time. I decided ahead of time. Actually, I'm deciding I want them to have my email now. So it came from me. So it's never about the email. It's about this sense of feeling like I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But as it is, I didn't buy anything, so I never.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
I still don't have my email.
You know, I love your UK brands. Couple things. One is that, you know, I'm sitting here asking you how you regulate. You're naming some things, but you named the first thing. And I think it's the most important thing is first getting the awareness that you're activated, right? Like, I think that's actually a foundational skill and hard. It sounds so easy, but it's not, because we just go into it. It's very like, it sucks you right in and you don't necessarily know. I think that is, for me too, the thing that has changed the most is that I can recognize when I'm getting activated. Number one. Number two is that regulation itself, I believe, and this is what I've based my course on, that I no longer run, or I won't be running it for a while, but is that it's very difficult to regulate yourself if your food is chronically dysregulated. This does speak a little bit more to binge restrictors, because if you're having periods of like fasting or restricting and then having these huge binges, like the roller coaster of that, food is such a primary way that our body understands safety. So if the body is dysregulated with food or with sleep, there's other things that we can be, you know, these baseline things we can be dysregulated with. It's very difficult to regulate yourself. So one thing I've noticed is that I find it relatively much easier, not relatively easy. It's easier than it used to be to regulate myself. But I think a large part of that is because my food is regulated. So I've got this baseline security that I didn't have access to before. So I want to name that as how food is related to that. And then I think there's this, like, how do we regulate our system when that is in place? And that's my new course that I'm running in January. And to me, there is, like, to the point last week of becoming dysregulated right here and in the recording of that episode, I had awareness that I was dysregulated, but I have to wait to be able to come back. But it's still in the knowing I don't need to react and respond right now. Whereas before, I think that I would have dysregulated, not understood what was even happening. And if I had understood, I still think I would have panicked at it because I didn't have a concept of what was happening to me. So I would have really the panic would then induce the binge or the restriction, one or the other, because I would have needed to do something about that right now because it felt like danger. Whereas now I'm like, I know what this is. It feels like danger, but it actually isn't. And if we give it time, that will become clear. And I just trust that. So that pausing is possible where it wasn't before. And I think having an understanding of the nervous system and what's going on has helped me so much to be able to trust that, to be like, oh, I do know what's happening to me. And this doesn't have to be scary and dangerous. I just have to wait, which is why pausing, is part of recovery.
Also, there's a difference between activation when you feel like genuine danger compared to just some of our stuff being activated. I mean, I know it's similar, but it feels a little bit different in that aspect. When I'm having a reaction to something, often, I don't remember who said it, but someone, I don't know if it's relatively famous quote maybe, that says about be as interested in your own reactions as you are in the thing that caused your reaction.
Yeah. Yes.
So I noticed that as well. If I'm listening to someone and I'm feeling flash of irritation or judgment or something like that, my brain will go to, what's going on for you here, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a long time ago, it would have stayed on the other person and it would have been like, well, no, I just think this about you. I'm just having these feelings about you because you're this. And then there would have been a phase where I would have just been like, I'm a terrible person because I feel grumpy over nothing or because I'm judging or whatever it might be. And now it's just, again, I can shift to those other places. I'm not saying I'm perfectly here, but much, much more often I'm like, why am I feeling so judgmental towards this person? Oh, it's because it's bringing up that thing in you because you have that pattern, you have that injury, which is enormously helpful compared to if I was shut in a room with a wasp, like I'm not regulating.
Yeah, because you're saying the danger then is
it's a difference between full blown fight or flight.
Yeah.
And then like a different kind of emotional overwhelm that has a whole story in it. It's like, is there a story or is there a perception of an imminent threat?
I actually have to disagree because you can have I have had the experience of having someone say something to me that has emotionally triggered me where no one else in the room has perceived it as dangerous and my body's perceiving it as dangerous. I think that danger is completely subjective. It's about what your body perceives as dangerous. This is what trauma is, right? Like it's not about what happened. It's about how your body interprets what happened and how that stays in the body. I have felt the wasp feeling that you experience with things my dad has said. Like that is the level of like that can come up. And I feel like it's extraordinarily dangerous. Same with body image. I've looked in the mirror and felt that level of danger that is so fight or flight, like so high. And that's because my body has read weight gain as dangerous to that degree. And I think it's just about what your body reads as dangerous and knowing those things because we are so quick to minimize an emotional activation because no one else is reacting that way, or it's somebody just said something. So we minimize it when in fact, I believe that we can have just as really high levels of activation occur from emotional triggers because they're read as dangerous in some way.
That's really interesting because my first thought kind of went to, I don't know if I've ever had that feeling from something someone has said to me. But then I thought I have had that feeling from when my dad has, and this has not been for years, but raised his voice when he's been angry because I was terrified of him growing up. So there have been times in my adult life when he has, again, like this is years ago, even now, raised his voice and like that nervous system flood of adrenaline, cold, fear, heart pounding, all that kind of thing happened.
Yeah. Last year at this time, I went away. I went to visit my parents and they don't trigger me to that degree. I process a lot of it, but my dad did say something, it's coming up right now, that he said to me, it was a comparison basically of me and my siblings. And, my whole body went the same way as last week. Like when I got this, it was like this thing. And I was going to minimize it. I was like, he's just doing his thing, but my body was not having it. And I had to take time. Still, it can activate. There's something about this memory of what comparison means about me that reads as very like scary. So I think it's important that we're not minimizing that, because if you're experiencing something that feels this way in your body, that can trigger binge permission, permitting or restricting. I think that is essentially what used to happen to me chronically, constantly. And it was like, that's what's going on. That's creating this urge to get away from that through food or through control of food. And that's a completely different lens to take on your relationship with it and what it's doing for you, instead of just I'm hungry or I'm not hungry, or I'm obsessed with food or I'm not.
Is there any pattern that you can see about when you would have gone to restriction versus binging? I'm just thinking with the blood test results, for example, my logical mind, I don't know if you would follow this logic, would go, had you been back there, your pull would have been to restrict, to control, because you would, the fear of like what the blood test meant, wanting to take control. Would you be more likely to go that way in that type of situation back when, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. If I was in my 30s, yes. If I was in my 20s, no. So I would have to sit here longer and figure out what's the difference between my 30s and 20s. I can tell you, if that same trigger had happened when I was 23, I would have binged. And if the same trigger had happened when I was 37, I would have restricted. I don't know the difference, except the place in my life that I just was at, or what I was more in the habit of doing. But that's a good question. Maybe we should have started there. I feel like that would be useful.
We got to the question that we needed to right at the end.
All right,
so
fair enough.
We got there.
And that's valuable.
I also just want to comment as well, how from like a societal diet culture perspective, how the restrictor behavior is kind of upheld and seen as the ideal. And I know I certainly felt like as a permitter that I was failing, even having a proper eating disorder.
Yes.
I should be over here like struggling to eat. And that I
agree.
I feel like we need to end on some words of wisdom or comfort to people. I don't know what they would be. So words of comfort. You are enough.
Well, I don't know if it's words of comfort, but to me, what I gathered from this episode is that whether you're a permitter or a restrictor, like, I think it's about looking at how your body is being activated prior to either response and investigating that side of things, instead of worrying so much about what the label is, you know what I mean? And looking at the common denominator.
Yeah. And noticing when you're being pulled to control or rebel anywhere in life, because control can look like, I don't know, feeling stressed or overwhelmed and going and cleaning the whole house and organizing everything. Like that can be a way of trying to take control. That can be a similar sort of pattern as to what might happen with food. There's something about like moments we want to feel safe, control or rebel. It's like, do I want control or do I want freedom right now? Which one am I being pulled towards? Which one do you get pulled towards more often? What does it mean? I mean, I don't know. Don't ask me.
I think you're right to be asking the question. Like, to me, I'm saying there's no pattern. It's just activation itself. And I think your point, and I think they're both valid, is that perhaps there are patterns of when you would restrict or when you would permit. And what is that telling you? And I think, depending on the listener, which one feels more relevant to where you are in your journey of which question to pursue or which thing to look at. All right, there. Whew. We did it.